Millionaire lost hope after years of treatment, until a waitress helped cure his illness. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. For years, Ethan Ward had lived in a world of quiet hallways, white walls, and the mechanical rhythm of hospital monitors. Once one of New York's most promising business magnates, he now sat in silence, watching sunlight crawl across the sterile floor of his private suite. The city outside kept moving, cars honked, sirens wailed, people lived, but inside this room, time had stopped. His hair had gone grayer than his 38 years should allow, and his sharp brown eyes, once filled with confidence, now carried a dull reflection of defeat. Every treatment, every specialist, every experimental drug had failed him. "There's nothing more we can do," his doctor had said months ago, voice low and heavy with pity. Since then, Ethan had fired 3 nurses, stopped answering calls, and refused food most days. On the night our story begins, rain tapped against the window, a slow, uneven sound like a heartbeat fading. A tray of untouched dinner sat cold on the table. The silverware gleamed under the dim light, too perfect, too polished, too meaningless. Ethan reached for the small amber bottle of pills beside him, turned it over in his hand, and let it fall onto the floor with a soft thud. "I'm done fighting," he whispered to no one. Downstairs, the hospital cafeteria buzzed quietly with the chatter of night shift staff and the clatter of plates. Among them was Clara Hayes, a 24-year-old waitress working double shifts to pay off her brother's college tuition. She wasn't supposed to be near the VIP ward. Her job was simple: serve food, clean tables, smile at patients who still had hope. But tonight, an order had been misplaced. Someone upstairs had requested a late meal. "Room 1502, the chef called, sliding a tray toward her. "Top floor. Be careful with that one, he doesn't talk much." Clara hesitated. She'd heard rumors about the man in 1502, the millionaire who'd given up. People said he used to run a company worth billions before illness took everything but his name. She took a breath, adjusted her ponytail, and balanced the tray carefully in her hands. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Each floor passed with a soft ding and a reflection of her nervous face in the chrome doors. When she finally reached the top, the hallway was silent. Expensive art lined the walls, each painting framed in gold. The kind of world she'd only seen from the outside. Clara knocked lightly. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She exhaled and pushed the door open. The room was dim except for the city lights bleeding through the window. Ethan sat by the glass, a shadow against the skyline. "Sir," she said softly, setting the tray on the table. "Your dinner." He didn't turn around. "Leave it." His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. "Of course," she murmured, but instead of leaving, she took a hesitant step forward. "Would you like me to warm it up?" "No." A pause, then quieter. "It doesn't matter." Something in the way he said it made her stop. The exhaustion in his tone wasn't just physical, it was the kind of weariness that came from fighting too long alone. She glanced at the untouched tray, the cold soup, the empty water glass. Without thinking, she took a small napkin from her apron and scribbled a note in blue ink. "Food may not heal, but warmth sometimes can." She folded it neatly and slipped it beside the plate. When she looked up, Ethan's eyes met hers for the first time, tired, skeptical, but curious. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes, sir, just part-time." "Then you should know not to bother patients." She smiled gently, unoffended. "Maybe, but sometimes patients need more than silence." Before he could answer, she turned and left, the soft click of the door fading behind her. Ethan stared at the note on the table, the simple handwriting looping across the napkin. For the first time in months, he reached for the spoon. Outside, the rain kept falling. But somewhere, between the sound of thunder and the taste of warm soup, a tiny spark, something almost forgotten, stirred again inside him. The next morning, the rain had cleared, but the gray still lingered in the sky. Ethan sat by the window again, staring at the faint steam rising from the cup of tea the nurse had left earlier. He had not slept much. His mind kept circling back to the small note written on the napkin the night before. Food may not heal, but warmth sometimes can. The handwriting was slightly uneven, almost rushed, but every letter seemed to carry a quiet sincerity. He was not used to sincerity. In his world, people spoke in deals, promises were transactions, and kindness always came with an invoice. Yet that small act from a stranger had left a trace. Downstairs, Clara finished her morning shift. She had slept barely 3 hours before returning for the breakfast service. When she checked the assignment sheet, her name was again next to room 1502. She blinked in surprise. "Did someone change the schedule?" she asked the head nurse. "The patient requested you," the woman said without looking up. "That has never happened before. Just do your job and do not talk too much." Clara nodded, her stomach twisting with nerves. When she entered the suite, Ethan was awake, clean-shaven, and reading the newspaper. The tray from last night was empty. He looked up, and for the first time there was something different in his expression, not warmth, not yet, but curiosity. "You are back," he said. "Yes, sir. They told me to deliver your breakfast." She set the tray on the table, trying to sound casual. "I am sorry about last night. I did not mean to—" "To bother me?" he interrupted, his tone neutral. "You did, but maybe that was not entirely bad." Clara blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or an observation. Ethan gestured toward the table. "Sit for a moment. You do not have to serve and run. I am not a prisoner." "I could lose my job," she said softly. "Then sit for just a minute." His voice was firm but not harsh, so she sat on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable. "You wrote that note," he said finally. She nodded. "Why?" "Because I have seen too many patients give up," she answered quietly. "I thought maybe you just needed someone to remind you that not all battles are lost." Ethan studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp but searching. "And what makes you so sure I have not lost mine?" "Because you are still here," she said simply. "People who truly give up do not ask for dinner, even if they do not eat it." That made him exhale, a sound that was almost a laugh but not quite. "You are too clever for a waitress," he murmured. "I will take that as a compliment." She stood up, smoothing her apron. "Enjoy your breakfast, Mr. Ward." After she left, Ethan looked down at the tray. For the first time in weeks, he picked up the fork before the food turned cold. Over the next few days, their brief encounters became routine. Clara would deliver his meals, and Ethan would find some reason to keep her talking. At first, it was small talk about the weather or the coffee being too strong. But then came deeper questions. "Why do you work here?" he asked one afternoon. She smiled faintly. "Because my brother wants to be the first in our family to finish college. I promised him he would not have to drop out like I did." "So you gave up your dreams for his?" "Maybe not gave up," she said. "Just postponed." Ethan nodded slowly, something unreadable passing through his eyes. Later that evening, when the doctor visited, he remarked that Ethan's appetite had improved. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it," the doctor said. Ethan only nodded, glancing at the clock. Clara's next delivery would be soon. That night, she brought him chamomile tea instead of water. "It helps you sleep," she said. He took a sip, then looked up at her. "You act like you believe I will be fine." She smiled. "Maybe I just believe people can still surprise themselves." When she left, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the steam curling from the cup. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him he thought was gone began to stir a fragile, reluctant hope, like light finding its way through a long-forgotten window. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's suite began to feel less like a tomb and more like a place where life still had a heartbeat. Every morning, Clara arrived with a quiet smile and a tray that always held something thoughtful. One day it was oatmeal with slices of fresh peach. Another day, a small vase with a wildflower she had picked from the hospital garden. She never stayed long, never overstepped, but she always left something behind: a word, a glance, a note scribbled on a napkin. Ethan found himself waiting for her knock without realizing it. The nurses whispered about the change. His color had improved, his tone was lighter, and he had started walking again with the help of the physical therapist. Yet, what they did not see was the way his mind had started to heal too. One afternoon, while the sunlight poured through the window, Clara walked in carrying his lunch. She looked different, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression brighter than usual. "Big day?" he asked. "Double shift," she said, setting the tray down. "The cafeteria is short-staffed, so I am filling in downstairs after this." "You work too hard," he said quietly. "So do you, Mr. Ward," she teased. "Or at least you used to." Ethan smiled faintly. Used to, he echoed. I have not been that man for a long time. Clara tilted her head. Maybe he is still there, just buried under too much noise. He looked at her for a moment, wanting to say something but choosing silence instead. Later that evening, she returned to collect the tray and found him standing by the window holding a sketchbook. You draw? She asked, surprised. Not really, he said. I just used to sketch ideas when I was building things. It helps me think. He turned the book around to show a half-finished drawing of the hospital garden. It is not much. It is more than you think, she replied. Sometimes creating something small is how people remind themselves they are still alive. She did not know it, but her words settled in him like sunlight through fog. The next day, when she came in, she found another sketch on the table. This one was of a teacup, steam rising in soft pencil lines. At the bottom, he had written one word, thanks. She smiled to herself before quietly continuing her work. Weeks later, the hospital board announced that a group of donors would visit to evaluate patient care. The staff scrambled to prepare, polishing every surface, reviewing every record. Clara was told she would assist in the dining area that day, away from the VIP floor. Do not go upstairs, her supervisor said firmly. The VIP suite is off-limits during inspection. She nodded, though a strange worry tugged at her. Ethan had been restless lately. His test results were improving, but he seemed preoccupied, like a man wrestling with something deeper than illness. That evening, she found out why. As she cleared tables in the cafeteria, the head nurse rushed in, pale-faced. The patient in 1502 collapsed, she whispered. Without thinking, Clara ran for the elevator. When she burst into the room, Ethan was sitting on the floor, his back against the bed, breathing heavily. I am fine, he managed between breaths, though his face was ashen. No, you are not, she said, kneeling beside him. You should have called someone. I did not want anyone else, he said weakly. She froze, meeting his eyes. There was pain there, but also something else, trust. She stayed until the doctors arrived, her hands steady as she helped them lift him back onto the bed. Hours later, after he was stable, she sat by his bedside, too tired to leave. He opened his eyes slowly, the beeping of the monitor soft in the background. You came? He whispered. Of course I did, she said. Someone has to remind you to keep fighting. His lips curved into a faint smile. You really are stubborn. So are you, she replied. That makes us even. When she finally left that night, Ethan watched her go, realizing that somewhere between the pain and the recovery, she had become more than a kind voice in a quiet room. She had become his reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was not only about medicine but about finding someone who saw the person behind the illness. The following week brought an unusual sense of warmth to the hospital, even though the air outside had grown colder. Ethan's recovery had surprised the medical team. His blood pressure had stabilized, his sleep had improved, and he had even started walking on his own without needing constant supervision. Yet what surprised everyone more was his change in spirit. He no longer looked like a man waiting for the end. He looked like someone trying to start again. Every afternoon, Clara stopped by with a cup of tea, and somehow, those few minutes had become the highlight of his day. One day, when she entered the room, she found Ethan standing by the window in a navy sweater instead of his usual hospital gown. You look different, she said, smiling. Better? He asked. Alive, she replied softly. That is a start. He chuckled, a sound she had never heard from him before. I guess I owe you for that. You owe me nothing, she said. You did the hard part. Maybe, he said, but you reminded me that it was still worth doing. Clara set the tray on the table, noticing the sketchbook now filled with drawings. You have been busy, she said, flipping through the pages carefully. It helps, he said. When I draw, I do not think about the hospital or the noise. It feels like breathing again, she smiled. Maybe you should show someone your work. I am showing it to you, he said, his eyes holding hers for a moment too long. Clara's heartbeat quickened, but she looked away, pretending to arrange the teacup. Later that evening, as she was leaving her shift, a man in a tailored suit stopped her in the hallway. Miss Hayes? He asked politely. Yes, she said cautiously. I am Dr. Morris from the hospital administration, he said. We need to talk about your presence in Mr. Ward's suite. Her breath caught. Did I do something wrong? You have been spending a lot of time there, he said. That floor is restricted to medical staff only. Waitresses are not authorized for private patient contact. I did not mean to break any rule, she said quickly. He asked for me. I understand, doctor, Morris said, his tone firm but not unkind. But rules exist for a reason. You could lose your position if this continues. Clara nodded, feeling her throat tighten. I understand. That night she avoided Ethan's floor completely, telling herself it was for the best. But the next morning, as she carried trays through the cafeteria, she heard his voice behind her. You were not at breakfast, he said, startling her. He stood there, leaning on a cane but clearly stronger than before. Mr. Ward, you should not be here, she said quickly. They told me I cannot visit your room anymore. Why? Because I am not medical staff. I am just a waitress. Ethan frowned. Just a waitress? Do you have any idea how many doctors I have seen in the last 4 years? Not one of them made me want to live again. You did. She blinked, unsure how to respond. Please, he said, lowering his voice. Do not let them keep you away. I need someone who treats me like a person, not a patient. They could fire me, she whispered. Then I will hire you, he said. I own this hospital. Clara froze, staring at him. What? He gave a small, tired smile. It is not common knowledge, but the Ward Foundation funds this facility. I started it years ago, before I got sick. I stepped back when my health declined. She could hardly process his words. You are serious? Completely. And I intend to make sure no one here punishes kindness. Before she could stop herself, tears welled in her eyes. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, he said. You reminded me why I built this place to help people who still believe in hope. The next day, the hospital buzzed with news that Ethan Ward, the founder of the Ward Foundation, had personally intervened to protect a cafeteria worker. Rumors spread quickly, but Clara ignored them. When she returned to his room later, he was sitting with a file open on the desk. I want you to help me with something, he said. I am starting a new initiative for patient wellness, something more human. I think you are the right person to lead it. Me? She asked in disbelief. I do not even have a degree. You have what degrees cannot teach, he said gently. Heart. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she smiled through her tears. All right, she said softly. But only if you promise to keep fighting. Deal, he said. As she poured his tea that afternoon, the light through the window felt warmer than it had in months. And for the first time, both of them believed that healing had already begun. Weeks passed, and Ethan's story began to spread beyond the hospital walls. Reporters called it the Miracle of Ward 1502. Though both he and Clara knew it was not a miracle at all, it was simply the result of hope rediscovered. Ethan was no longer the frail, silent man who had once stared at the ceiling, waiting for his heartbeat to fade. He had resumed walking every morning through the hospital garden, his cane tapping softly against the stone path. Clara often joined him, sometimes pushing a cart of breakfast trays, sometimes just walking in silence beside him. Their conversations had become easier now, filled with light humor and shared memories. You know, he said one morning, I used to think money could fix anything. I had doctors flying in from across the world, entire research teams working on treatments, but none of it worked. Clara smiled gently. Maybe it was not medicine you needed. Maybe it was someone to remind you that you were more than your illness. And you did that, he said, without even trying. She blushed, looking down at the steaming cup in her hands. I just did what felt right. That is exactly why it worked, he replied. Days later, Ethan's foundation officially launched its new program, Warm Hands, an initiative designed to bring emotional support and community connection to patients who had lost hope. The hospital auditorium filled with staff, media, and donors, all eager to witness Ethan Ward's first public appearance in years. Clara stood quietly near the back, wearing a simple blue dress. When he took the stage, his voice was calm but strong. For years, he began. I thought healing came only from medicine. But the truth is, healing begins with kindness, with people who refuse to look away when others are in pain. One of those people works here. She reminded me that a single act of compassion can change everything. The crowd clapped, but Clara's heart pounded when Ethan turned toward her. Clara Hayes, he said, you reminded me what it means to live. Everyone turned as she froze, unsure what to do. Please come up, he said. Hesitant but trembling, she stepped onto the stage. Ethan smiled. This foundation would not exist without you. So today, I am naming you the first director of Warm Hands. The audience erupted in applause. Clara's eyes filled with tears as Ethan handed her a small frame, a napkin preserved behind glass, the one that read, "Food may not heal, but warmth sometimes can." "You kept it," she whispered. "It kept me," he replied. After the event, they walked together down the long hallway, away from the cameras and the noise. "You did not have to do all that," she said. "I meant every word," he replied. "You gave me back my life. It is only fair I help you build yours." "You already have," she said softly. They reached the garden where the evening sun painted everything gold. Ethan leaned on his cane, breathing deeply. "You know," he said, "for the first time in years, I am not afraid of tomorrow." "That is a good thing," she said, "because tomorrow does not seem so far away anymore." A breeze swept through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender. Clara adjusted the cup in her hand and smiled. "Tea?" she asked. He chuckled. "Only if you promise not to charge me this time." She laughed, the sound light and free, and he joined her. For a long moment they said nothing, just watching the light fade over the hospital's glass walls. It was not a grand ending, no fireworks, no dramatic music, just quiet understanding between two people who had saved each other in different ways. That night, as Ethan placed the framed napkin on his bedside table, he looked out at the city that had once felt so cold and distant. "Healing," he whispered, "is not about being cured. It is about finding someone who makes you want to live again." And somewhere beyond that window, in the same hospital where hope had once died, a young waitress with tired hands smiled at the thought that sometimes kindness truly could bring a heart back to life. Months passed, and the Ward Foundation's new program had already started to change lives. Patients who once refused to leave their rooms were now participating in art therapy, music sessions, and evening walks in the courtyard. Clara, now the director of Warm Hands, worked tirelessly to make sure every person who entered the hospital felt seen and valued. She was still the same Clara who once carried trays, but her name was now printed on the office door across from Ethan's. Every morning, Ethan would stop by with a cup of coffee and a smile that said more than words ever could. "How is my favorite director today?" he would ask, setting the cup on her desk. "Exhausted," she would reply, grinning. "But in a good way. That is the best kind of exhaustion," he would say. Their friendship had grown into something steady and deep, a quiet connection built on trust. Yet beneath that warmth something unspoken lingered. There were moments when their eyes met for a beat too long, or when his hand brushed hers as they reviewed a report together, and the air between them felt different. One rainy evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Clara was still in her office finishing paperwork. The lights in the hallway flickered softly, and thunder rolled in the distance. She was so focused that she did not notice Ethan standing at the doorway until he spoke. "You should not still be here," he said gently. She looked up, startled. "I could say the same to you." He smiled and walked in, holding 2 cups of tea. "Chamomile," he said. "Your favorite." She laughed. "You remembered." "I remember everything about the person who saved my life," he said softly. Clara's smile faltered. "Ethan, I did not save you. You saved yourself." "Maybe," he said, pulling up a chair beside her. "But you were the reason I wanted to." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the rain outside. "You have rebuilt this place," she said. "Everyone here adores you." "I just gave them what you gave me," he said. "A reason to keep going." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not the patient she had once pitied, but the man he had become, stronger, gentler, and somehow still carrying a trace of that quiet sadness that first drew her in. "You know," he said suddenly, "there is something I never told you." "What is that?" "The night I first read your note," he said, "I almost threw it away. I was angry, tired, ready to give up. But then I thought about the way you looked at me, like I was still human. That note did not just change my night, Clara. It changed everything." She felt tears sting her eyes. "I am glad I did not stay silent then," she whispered. "Me too," he said, reaching out. His hand covered hers gently, warm and certain. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When the rain softened to a drizzle, Ethan stood. "Walk with me?" he asked. They strolled through the dim corridors until they reached the hospital garden, now glistening with raindrops. The lamps cast soft halos of light across the wet path. "Do you ever miss the cafeteria?" he teased. She laughed. "Sometimes. It was simpler then. No meetings, no speeches, no pressure." "But no me," he said playfully. "True," she admitted, "and I would not trade that for anything." He turned to her then, eyes steady. Clara, when I was sick, I lost everything: my health, my faith, even myself. And then you appeared with a tray and a note that made me believe again. You did not just heal my body, you healed my heart." She felt her breath catch, the world narrowing to the space between them. "Ethan," he smiled faintly, "you do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know." The sound of the rain returned, soft and rhythmic, as if the world itself was listening. Clara's hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally, effortlessly. Neither of them moved for a while. In that quiet, surrounded by the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, they both knew that this, whatever it was, had already begun to grow long before either of them dared to name it. The man who once waited for death was now learning how to live again, and the woman who had once served him tea was now standing beside him, the heartbeat of his second chance. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees around the hospital in shades of gold and amber. The air carried the scent of change, crisp and new, much like the life Ethan Ward had built since the day he decided to live again. The Warm Hands program was expanding rapidly, with hospitals across the city reaching out to adopt its model. Clara worked longer hours than ever, but she loved every second of it. Watching patients smile again, seeing nurses laugh in the hallways, it made the exhaustion worth it. Ethan watched her from a distance more often than he admitted. Sometimes from his office window, other times from across the garden, always with that quiet admiration that had started to look suspiciously like love. Yet, just as everything seemed to fall into place, life reminded them that healing was never a straight path. One Friday morning, Clara arrived at the hospital to find the boardroom doors closed and tension thick in the air. The board of trustees had convened without notice. Whispers followed her down the corridor, something about an audit, missing funds, irregular transactions linked to the Warm Hands account. She froze when she saw Ethan standing at the end of the hallway, papers clutched in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Ethan, what is going on?" she asked. "They found discrepancies in the financial reports," he said, his voice low. "Someone transferred money from the foundation's account to an external vendor without authorization." "What?" "That cannot be right," she said quickly. "Who would—" "They think it was you, Clara." The words hit her like a blow. "Me?" she whispered. "That is impossible. I would never—" "I know," he interrupted, but his tone was heavy, uncertain. "We will figure it out. Just stay calm." Within hours, the hospital was buzzing with gossip. Staff who once smiled at her now looked away. Her office was sealed, her access card deactivated. Clara sat in the cafeteria, the same one where she had first carried trays months ago, staring at the cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. When Ethan found her there, she looked up, her eyes red from holding back tears. "Do you believe me?" she asked. He hesitated just long enough for the silence to hurt. "I want to," he said quietly. She nodded, her voice trembling. "That is not the same as saying you do." Before he could reply, she stood and walked out, leaving him alone with the echo of her footsteps. Days turned into weeks, and though investigators later discovered the issue had been caused by a former accountant falsifying invoices, the damage was done. Clara resigned before the board could clear her name. She left a short letter on Ethan's desk that simply read, "Thank you for everything. Please keep fighting." Ethan tried to contact her, but her phone was disconnected. The hospital felt colder without her laughter, the garden empty without her teacups and flowers. He buried himself in work, meeting after meeting, trying to pretend the ache in his chest was not loneliness. One night, while reviewing project files, he found the framed napkin again, the note that had started it all. His fingers traced the words, and he felt a sharp pang of regret. He had believed numbers over people, and in doing so he had lost the one person who had taught him what faith meant. A knock came at the door, and Dr. Morris stepped in. "The expansion plans are ready for your approval," he said, "but you might want to see this first." He handed Ethan an envelope. Inside was a photograph of a community center under construction with a sign above it that read, "Warm Hands Outreach, founded by Clara Hayes." Ethan stared at it for a long time, his throat tight. She had not disappeared. She had kept going, turning pain into purpose, just like she had taught him to do. That night, under the soft hum of the city outside his window, Ethan made a decision. He would find her, not as the man she once served tea to, but as the man who finally understood what healing truly meant, standing beside someone even when the world turns against them. Winter came early that year, blanketing the city in soft white snow. The world outside glittered beneath the streetlights, quiet and still, But inside Ethan Ward's office, sleep had become a stranger. The photograph of Clara's new community center sat on his desk, edges worn from how many times he had held it. For weeks, he had followed her work from afar, watching articles appear about the small building she had turned into a haven for patients recovering after treatment. Every headline praised her for continuing the mission of Warm Hands, yet none mentioned the man who had once stood beside her. He deserved that silence, he thought. He had failed her when it mattered most. One evening, as he left the hospital late, a familiar name caught his eye on a flyer posted near the entrance. Warm Hands Outreach, Annual Fundraiser, Saturday, December 12. Clara Hayes, founder and director. He stood there for a long moment, the winter wind biting through his coat. Then, without hesitation, he made a call. 2 nights later, the community center was alive with warmth and music. Volunteers in scarves and coats greeted guests, their laughter echoing through the hall. Tables were lined with handmade crafts, photographs, and stories from patients who had found new purpose through the program. Clara moved through the crowd, smiling, shaking hands, thanking donors. She looked radiant, confident, and at peace. It had been months since she left the hospital, and though the ache of what had happened still lingered, she had poured everything into this new beginning. When the last guest stepped away from the microphone, a familiar voice spoke from the back of the room. "You always did know how to make a room feel alive." The sound made her freeze. Slowly she turned. Ethan stood there, taller than she remembered, wrapped in a dark overcoat, snow still melting on his shoulders. The room fell quiet as he stepped forward. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice soft but guarded. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to fix what I broke," he said. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a donation certificate, $1 million, from the Ward Foundation to Warm Hands Outreach. "You do not have to accept it," he said, "but I hope you will. This program deserves to grow." She looked at the paper, then back at him. "You could have sent this through anyone." "I know," he said, "but this time I wanted to show up." Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Ethan, when everything happened, I thought you believed I was guilty." "I did," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "And that is the part that will haunt me forever. I believed numbers and signatures instead of the person who taught me how to believe in people again. I am sorry." The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. For a moment, she said nothing, only studying his face, the exhaustion, the sincerity, the man she had once helped rebuild. "I do not know if I can forget that," she said finally. "I am not asking you to," he replied. "I just need you to know I never stopped believing in what you built, even when I lost faith in myself." She took a long breath, looking around at the laughter, the lights, the people their dream had touched. "You helped start all this," she said quietly. "Maybe we both did," he said, "but it only kept going because of you." Silence stretched again before she stepped closer. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I finally understood," he said. "Healing does not end when the wounds close. It ends when you forgive yourself for letting them happen." Clara felt something shift in her chest, the final weight she had carried since the day she left the hospital. "You have changed," she said softly. "You made sure I would," he replied with a small smile. She laughed quietly, wiping her eyes. "Then maybe we both learned something." The music began again, soft and slow, and when he offered his hand, she hesitated only for a heartbeat before taking it. Around them, the world continued: patients, volunteers, laughter. But for that one moment, the two people who had once been broken found themselves whole again. It was not a grand reunion, no dramatic ending, just a quiet, steady rhythm of forgiveness, like a heartbeat that had finally remembered how to keep time. A year later, the city bloomed again beneath spring sunlight, and with it came the quiet hum of new beginnings. The Ward Foundation had joined forces with Warm Hands Outreach, turning Clara's small community center into a nationwide program that reached hospitals across the country. The once forgotten ward of a single hospital had become a symbol of hope and compassion. Ethan stood in front of the new headquarters on Monroe Street, its glass walls reflecting the morning light. Reporters and donors waited by the doors, ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Clara stood beside him, calm yet glowing in a light gray dress that matched the color of the sky. The world saw them as partners in philanthropy, but those who had walked beside them through their story saw something deeper, two hearts that had healed together. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, leaning slightly toward her. "As ready as I will ever be," she said with a soft smile. "You know, I never imagined any of this when I first carried a tray into your room." "Neither did I," he said. "I thought that was the end of my story. Turns out, it was just the start. The ceremony